Well, hello, my friends, and happy Sunday to you. Look at this gorgeousness. Oh, the texture, the yummy goodness. Oh, so good. So I'm starting out on an 11 by 14 MDF board, and I've just grabbed a bunch of book pages and scraps, and I'm just putting them all down with my DecoArt matte medium, and I'm just kind of placing them randomly, kind of spacing them out, giving a little bit of balance to the colors that I put in the background, but really I'm not trying to pay too much attention. I'm just trying to get them down and play and have fun. And now I've got these numbers that I had laying around in my scrap box, and I thought, ooh, those would be great to peek through in the background. So I placed them evenly around the page where I thought they might show through. I kind of had an idea of what I was going to do, so I kept them away from the middle part because I knew I was going to be covering that up with a lot of color. So now I went back to my super heavy gesso, trying to really get a feel for it and see if it's something that I want to use. I'm using a very large and long palette knife, which I use when I want to spread my medium quickly and get that skipping kind of trowel effect. I don't get that with my square palette knife, but the longer the palette knife, the less control I have and the more fun I think it is. So I went to my square palette knife to scrape back now in certain areas because I wanted to make sure that those yummy numbers showed up, and some of those papers. I didn't want all of those papers to be completely covered up. So I took my square palette knife because I have a lot of control with that, and I can really localize the area that I want to scrape back. And then just started randomly scraping so that I could get those numbers to show and some of those papers. So now I'm going to be working with Liquitex Basics Medium Gray and some Americana glazing medium. And I use a glazing medium this time. I go back and forth, but a glazing medium is smoother and more seamless rather than a wash. And because I had a lot of texture, I wanted it to get into the grooves, and I was going to use a couple of colors. And so it gives me more variation. I have a little bit more control with a glazing medium than just a wash. And so that's why I chose to use my paints with glazing medium today. And I'm just spreading that neutral gray around, getting an even coat, going back over it and pulling it up, adding it, pulling up. It's a dance, trying to figure out what looks good and what doesn't. And I'm going to be putting another color on top. I'll be using raw umber with glazing medium and doing a second coat of glaze. I do come back and with some alcohol on my rag, pull it back because all of the ridges, all of those things that are creating that yummy texture are highlighted when I dampen my rag with some alcohol and then go back over it. And so here's the raw umber, and I'm not covering all of it. I'm just doing little bits and pieces just here and there just to give it some real good aging, to give it a kind of fresco look, an aged wall, just some real grungy goodness. And again, I'm coming back and pulling it back, pulling some of that paint back with alcohol. So I've just randomly cut out on a couple of pieces of paper just a design to kind of mask off the area that I wanted. And I'm using Marabou Art Spray. And before it dried, I just took a wet brush and kind of feathered out the edges so that I could drip it and so that it wouldn't be super neat and tidy. And I cut the papers that I masked off kind of in a random design because I didn't want it to be straight. And that first stencil was my Geo Leaves stencil, and this stencil is the Mediterranean. And I decided to stencil this in instead of spray it because I wanted it in specific areas. I am using a fluid acrylic because I knew I was going to water it down and I didn't need my stencil to be crisp and clean and all that kind of stuff. And again, I love the concentration of color in fluid acrylic. And I'm just spraying with water and getting those to drip and kind of move around and not be too precise. Just getting some good drips. I'm coming back now to maybe define, because some of them washed away a lot when I put my water on there, so I kind of went back a little bit and helped to define them again. So now I am going to put down just a scrap piece of paper, and the reason I put this scrap piece of paper behind my drywall tape is because, one, texture, and two, I wanted to kind of block off some of that color because I knew I was going to put a word over the top of it. And I knew that I was going to cover it again with some gesso, and I wanted an area to be opaque enough for the word to go down. And so I'm just now with regular gesso, not super heavy gesso. This is Deco Art Media gesso. I'm just going over that drywall tape and the texture that it picks up. And just kind of smoothing out the edges and really making it rough and kind of flowy. And now I'm going to come back in with some of that gesso and just run over it with my palette knife to give it again that kind of rough edge. And I'm using that same large palette knife that I used when I put down the initial super heavy gesso, and it was hard because it's so large, you have less control. So it was hard to get exactly where I wanted, but it turned out just fine. So again, I'm bringing back in that design, that geoleaf design, to kind of soften some of the edges and kind of bring out what is underneath. And I'll kind of wash it away a little bit just to give it, again, the same feel. And I'm just putting some alcohol on my rag and picking up that paint and giving it a real washed out look. And at this point, this is the point in the painting, and it always happens, where I'm not sure if I like it. Like, where am I going? I grabbed some Daler & Rowney sepia acrylic ink and kind of toned down that white. It just felt too bright. And I didn't want to take away from the texture, so that acrylic ink was perfect because it just seeped right into all of the crevices of the drywall tape and the gesso, and it toned it down a little bit. But then it was too toned down. And see, this is what I love about creating, because it's just a dance, and you just go back and forth until you find the right thing. And you just keep going until it feels good. So I've taken my fine liner applicator that's got paint and airbrush medium in it, and I love this applicator, and I'm just doing some scribbles and really messy, super messy, and along the edges and kind of along with the drips. This is my block font stencil, and I'm just going to stencil in my word believe. And I wanted to start bringing in some black and some other design features in the piece. And so I grabbed my vintage cross stencil, and it was perfect. It's like everything starts to come together, and I love that space when you're creating when it does. And I just watered down I didn't wait for it to dry, and I just watered down the edges of those crosses and let them drip, and it was just perfect. So now I'm coming back in with some pan pastels, and I'm darkening the edges, but I'm also going to go around the piece and really add some shading. And when you take the pan pastel, or even you could use a chalk pastel, but I love using the pan pastels because I have that flat brush. I come across the edges of the texture, and oh man, it just highlights it. And across that drywall tape, it just is so beautiful. And it adds just the right depth and dimension that I was looking for. So all of the supplies are going to be listed on the blog, and links to the products that I've used. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please subscribe and give it a thumbs up and share and all of those wonderful things. I so appreciate it. Appreciate all of your comments and your questions. And I hope you stick around for the message after. It's a good one. I was inspired, and I have some great words for you to share. So it needed, and if you've ever seen me, if you've heard anything that I've ever said, white and black are always neutralizing to me. And it needed that pop of white. And as soon as I put that down, it was like, oh, the angels sang, and I knew it was done. And I love it when that happens. So I loved it so much as I was doing this that I added too much. And so I had to pull some back because it was too even. I need that like odd number or offset. And so you'll see me pull some back. But I love this piece. I love all the texture and all the goodness. So I will see you next week, and have a wonderful Sunday. Well, hello lovies, and happy Sunday to you. So here's this, whoa, yummy goodness. The texture on this is delightful. I just love it. I love the super heavy gesso and the texture it provides, and the papers that peek through. I always say it's magic, and it is every single time. It just makes me happy, and just all of the texture. And it took me a while to kind of find my way in this, but I love it now. There was a point where I was like, oh, I don't know where this is going, but I love it. I added this white gesso at the very end, and it was like, ah, I love it when that happens. But I went through everything in the video, and so I think most of the papers that I have in the background are just random scraps. I'm not sure that they're part of collage packs or anything, but I use several different stencils, and I talked about those throughout the video. And all the products are on the blog. So this says Believe. And I have been reading Brene Brown's Daring Greatly. All of her books are fabulous, by the way, if you're looking for a good read. But this is one that I go back to over and over and over again. I've had it for a very long time, and I just continue to go back to it when I'm needing inspiration. I shared last week that, I was having those January blues and needing inspiration, and I always go back to Brene and her words of wisdom. And it's just, it's everything that I've read of hers is so encouraging. But this word believe has a lot of, it can mean a lot of things. And as I was reading her book, that's what prompted this, because when we're believing in our dreams, or believing in a direction that we're going, or believing in relationships, or our work environment, when we're striving for something and trying to make things better, even ourselves, we need to believe and have that confidence. And as I was reading her book, she was talking about vulnerability that comes along with this, because too often we can not strive to move forward, not strive to believe in our dreams, in one another, to believe in our partners and those kinds of things. And it also goes along with trust as well, which is a super scary word to a lot of people. But that it's super vulnerable believing, because there's risk. There's risk in this. And so often that keeps us from ever stepping outside of our comfort zone, that ever keeps us trying and striving and making a step towards our dreams. And and our goals and whatever this can mean to you, whatever you're striving for. And it's always different for everyone. It could be health, it could be weight loss, it could be, a number of things. But I wanted to read, this is the very last chapter of almost the last chapter. It says that daring greatly is not about winning or losing. It's about courage. And that's what I really believe that this word believe means, is all about courage. In a world where scarcity and shame dominate and feeling afraid has become second nature, vulnerability is subversive. It's uncomfortable, which this can be too, believing in what and having the courage to step out. It can be uncomfortable. It's even a little dangerous at times. And without question, putting ourselves out there means there's a far greater risk of feeling hurt. And no one wants to feel hurt. And the second that we get scared about that we retract and pull away from things and step back into our box and into our comfort zone. But she goes on to say, but as I look back on my own life and what daring greatly has meant to me, I can honestly say that nothing is as uncomfortable and dangerous and hurtful as believing that I'm standing on the outside of my life, looking in and wondering what it would be like if I had the courage to show up and let myself be seen. You guys, words to just absorb and think about. Believing in our dreams and our goals and what we want to do is vulnerable and it's scary and it's all about courage. But what is the alternative? Seriously, what's the alternative if we don't? So, loves, I want to leave you with that, and I want to encourage you, whatever it is, if it's creatively, artistically, relationships, and I know I say this all the time, but sometimes you have to say it over and over and over again. And just this week, as I'm planning out business stuff, I'm doing some really scary things with the business, making jumps into a world that I just don't, I'm super scared about. And yet, what's the alternative? I can't shrink back. I'm going to move forward. And there is always a risk of, and I hate to even use the word failure, because I don't think it's failure. I think that even in art, if I can use art as an example, even if this piece was a complete flop, there was still a lesson in it. There was still something that I learned and that I will take to the next piece. And that's how I try to look at every single circumstance in business and relationships and all of those things. And believe me, I've had a lot of flops in a lot of areas. In all areas, my goodness. But that's the part of being vulnerable that is the hardest and the most valuable. Absolutely the most valuable. So believe, my loves, believe today that you are worthy and that you are loved and that you can do it. Yes. Amen. So I'll get down off of my soapbox and I will wish you a wonderful Sunday, my loves. And I hope it's restful and awesome and you are able to take a moment to believe and be vulnerable and take a risk. And I hope that you always know that you are loved.